So my mother had lymphoma, my stepdad had leukemia. They were battling with that, and luckily they were in California, and they were able to use cannabis to sort of help them through all of their symptoms, deal with going through chemo. And it was really helpful to be able to see that and see, how passionate people were about helping them get through that battle.
What's going on, dispensary owners? In this episode of the Dispensary Marketing Podcast, I'm pleased to bring you Taylor Mullen from Paragon Payroll. This episode is really awesome. She's an absolute beast at HR and payroll, specifically in the cannabis space. One topic that keeps on coming up is how to retain your employees. The obvious answer is to just pay them more money, but Taylor unveils a bunch of other things that employees take into consideration, such as onboarding, training, maintaining company culture. There's a lot of things underneath the hood than just paying your employees more money that will get them to stay with you for the long term. You're not going to want to miss it, and I'll see you over there. Taylor, thanks for hopping on the Dispensary Marketing Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me today. I appreciate it.
Of course. So let's hop right into it. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are, how you got into the HR space, specifically in cannabis, and why people should listen to you?
Sure. I mean, people should just listen to me because everything I say is brilliant, but
of course.
No, I'm totally kidding. So first of all, thank you for having me today. I have actually been in the HR and payroll space since 2016. I was in Parks and Rec before that, just like the TV show, and it was wonderful. And all of my family essentially either worked for small businesses or in the sales world, and I swore I would never do either. And then in 2016, I was recruited to my first sales job, and I have not left since. So I was recruited by ADP to go sell payroll and HR. And since then, I have had the benefit of working for some of the largest names in the company. I've worked at your ADP, Paychex, Paylocity, all very well-known and respected companies. And I learned a ton. It was super helpful. But I was looking to potentially work for a smaller company. Having come from that Parks and Rec space, I really liked being able to get my voice heard. And so I was looking for what my next opportunity was. And while I was doing that, unfortunately, the story ends happily, but my mother and stepfather actually both got cancer. So my mother had lymphoma, my stepdad had leukemia. They were battling with that, and luckily they were in California, and they were able to use cannabis to sort of help them through all of their symptoms, deal with going through chemo. And it was really helpful to be able to see that and see, how passionate people were about helping them get through that battle. So when I was looking for what company to move to next, and I ran into Paragon, who was cannabis specific, I was probably a little hesitant at first. Coming from the corporate space, cannabis still has a little bit of a stigma, but they definitely were focused on service and really helping the cannabis industry stay really healthy and productive. And so I took the leap. They have been around since 2007, but they've been around since 2016, solely focused on cannabis. So I figured, why not? If I could take my payroll and my HR knowledge and use it to help the cannabis space, I felt like I was actually giving back a bit. So it's been fun.
Right. I know just going into the cannabis space, just in general, whether you're a retailer, a brand, a marketing agency, it's a completely different beast because it's a whole new set of rules and regulations.
Yep.
It's always changing. Everything's evolving. What would you say were kind of like the biggest differences from making the transition from, again, the corporate style of life to, the cannabis style of life?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of red tape. If I work with a manufacturing company in California or the Carolinas, the laws are generally the same. It's going to be across the board the same thing. That is not the case in cannabis whatsoever, or even in the hemp space. I'm actually in South Carolina, and seeing our hemp farmers go through all of the red tape and the hoops you have to get to be in the industry, that was a steep learning curve. I can tell you all about HR paperwork. I can tell you how to fill out an I-9, but now I had to learn all of the rules and regulations that came along with being in cannabis. So that is actually one of the reasons why I wanted to work for a company that had longevity in the space. I wanted to work with somebody who already knew the answers to what's happening in cannabis and how do we fix it, as opposed to somebody who maybe just sees a cash cow and wants to get into the payroll space. We do see a lot of new payroll companies popping up, which is fantastic because it means the industry is healthy. People are seeing a profit and they want to get in here. But they haven't worked hard to get in here. You know, they haven't had to deal with some of the battles of cannabis. So I am a nerd. So I like to say that some of these payroll companies have merely adapted to the darkness, but Paragon was born from it. So we really are very familiar with all the different changes that comes with cannabis and all of the red tape. No matter what state you're in, if you're multi-state, we have the ability to walk you through it. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is just it changes. I mean, it could be every other week at some points in different counties. So just having a company that has that database to stay on top of it.
Right. Lots of rules, regulations changing and stuff like that. And I know in the accounting space, there's a lot of like assumptions business owners make on, you know, how they should, you know, do their taxes and handle all that sort of thing, right? I would assume when it comes to, again, the retailers, the brands, the manufacturers, there are also kind of like common pitfalls of what they assume is correct, but it actually is a massive no-no. Do you have kind of like a general top 1 to 5 list of, you know, common pitfalls of things people should look out for?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the biggest issue that we're seeing in this space is actually going to be pay wages. So that's going to be the absolute difference. So if you're in different states, the pay rates are absolutely different, but even things like tracking. So in some states, you have to track how many hours somebody is actually touching cannabis. In some states, it does not matter at all. With some industries, overtime is going to be the same way it would be for office employees. But if you're in the farming space and agriculture, they have different overtime hours. So you might be able to work 10 hours of straight pay as opposed to 8 hours and then 2 hours of overtime. So it's really important to understand not only your state, but also the category that your business is falling under to make sure that you are paying people correctly. Because as much as we are going to talk about like retention and culture and all of that fun stuff, if you pay people the wrong wage, they will never come back. People are mainly here for a paycheck. We can talk about a million other things, but they definitely want their paycheck to be accurate.
Right. So is that typically like a manual process? Is that a kind of trust process where you ask the employee to kind of, hey, you know, kind of docket your hours similarly to like what a lawyer does? Like, is it a software automation? Like, because this world is completely new to me. So I'm like,
sure. What do you mean? You're not focused on payroll and HR all day? This is not your favorite thing ever?
Yeah.
No, you know, it tends to be a manual entry for a lot of the people that I see getting into this industry. And that's actually one of my biggest frustrations, because it's just not something you want to play with. And it's also a huge time suck. So if you're a business owner or the manager and you're spending time working on the manual data entry of this type of information, one, it's so not waste your time. Like, if you really calculate your hourly wage as like an owner, you're maybe worth $50, $100 an hour. I have no idea. You can calculate that yourself, right? And then if you look at how many hours you're spending that on trying to calculate these different wages and then having to do the research to make sure you're doing it correctly, it's absolutely a sunken cost. So yes, it is done manually all the time. I would never suggest that. I would suggest working with a software that will be able to recognize the state and the job department your company and your employee is in. You should be able to do that in your software. If you can't, I would use a different software, because you should be able to put in, you know, I'm in New Jersey, but I live in New York, or vice versa. You know, sometimes I'm doing retail, sometimes I'm doing managerial. And if those are different pay rates, you want to be able to track that, because you want to be able to show that if you're ever audited. So yes, unfortunately, sometimes it is still manual. And that is my biggest frustration with this space, is people who are doing things manually. So I highly suggest any type of way to streamline your business is absolutely something you should be considering.
I just like kind of chuckle about that, because like you said, there's the cost of actually having to manually docket, and then somebody audits it, says, hey, this is wrong, then you have to kind of redo it. And typically that's kind of like the leadership position role, because they're the one handling the money. So It sounds like a nightmare. I don't envy, the people that need to do that, whatsoever. So, let's say we get that right. The foundation of paying your employees is paying them the appropriate wage. Like you said, if you don't pay them well, they're never going to come back, right? Now, the process of attracting top talent. I know based on the conversations that I've had with like different dispensary owners, of course, depending on what state, the novelty of cannabis itself is kind of worn off, right? It's like, you have a bud tender, you have a inventory manager, or even a general manager, assistant manager, whatever it is. And they come in, they're like, yay, I get to work in cannabis. I've been, smoking or consuming whatever it is since I was 18 years old, and now I can kind of go into this hip new field. Fast forward, they realize it's still a very a customer facing position where you have to do customer service. You have to smile when you're typically, you might not want to smile that day because you're having an awful day, and the novelty kind of wears off, right? So in terms of attracting the top talent, and then, the most important thing is, keeping them, what would be kind of your process or your advice to people who would want to kind of have the best people and keep them?
Sure. Yeah, I would definitely want to speak to that narrative, right? If it sounds fun, because at the end of the day, if you're in a dispensary, it is still retail. Most of us have worked retail. It's tough. Yep. If you're on the cultivation side, if you're farming, like that's still hard work. So the novelty is definitely worn off, and people are realizing this is a job. So in order to attract and keep the top, unfortunately, we have to actually, I would love if, everybody could just work in cannabis and money rain down from the sky, but we still have to do the work. So one of the biggest things is always going to be at the forefront of people's minds is compensation. And that's going to vary depending on your market. So if you are in a state with very few licenses, that also means that the people who live there are going to be less specialized in cannabis. You're going to have a smaller pool of people who already understand the industry. And so it's going to be competitive to get them on board. You're really going to have to figure out what you can offer in order to attract some of that very small talent pool. On the completely other side of that, though, you have states where competition is extremely high. It is saturated. But that means that your employees are always going to know that somebody around the corner might be willing to pay them more money. So you still have to pay them very well, even if they aren't as specialized or as skilled, because they have more opportunities to jump ship and go somewhere else. So it's not a cheap industry to get into. That's something that I always tell people to consider when they think I'm going to get in cannabis and I'm going to smoke weed and be rich. It's a lot of work, and it's going to cost you a lot of money on the forefront. The other thing I think that is really specific to cannabis is living your brand. Whatever your message is going to be to the public, that needs to be reflected in your employee interactions. This is a generation of younger talent. This is millennial. This is Gen Z. They expect you to live up to the expectations you set for yourself. If they feel like you are completely full of shit, they will leave you based off of principle. These people have opinions, and they have strong opinions, and they will leave if they feel like you're not living up to what you said. And then I would say the final thing is probably just figure out how you can differentiate yourself from your competition with what you're offering. If that's maybe company field trips for bonding that you can offer once a month or once a quarter. If you can have different competitions for bonuses. If you can offer just a different benefit, pet insurance. If you're in Denver, those people love their dogs. If you can offer them pet insurance, that is a great sticking opportunity to get that employee to stay. But unfortunately, another one is going to be access to their own wages. So our economy is super tough right now. Again, in the cannabis space, we're also seeing younger people. Bills are tough. People want access to their own money. And it's really uncomfortable to go and ask your job for a loan. And it also creates a huge administrative burden, right? Because then your administrator is having to tackle that with payroll, keep paperwork of it. So we have found that 79% of employees are actually willing to change jobs if a company offers them access to their own earned wages before payday. So let's say they're paid every other Friday. It's now Monday before payday and they have an unexpected bill. If they can borrow against their own paycheck without having to involve you, that is huge for them. So when we found that out, we partnered with a company who can do that right away. All of our clients actually have access to that, where they can just borrow against their own paycheck. Administration is not having to manage any of it, and they could take care of their bills. Really, just listen to your employees. They will tell you what they want. So if that's what they're telling you they want, just give it to them. I promise you, they are not keeping secrets. Your employees will tell you how to keep them. You just have to listen.
So the borrowing against your own paycheck, right? So in terms of, let's keeping numbers simple, let's just say you get paid $1,000 a week, right? But you get paid out bi-weekly. So every 2 weeks you get $2,000. So I'm at the 1 week mark and I'm like, I need the money for, I don't know, my car broke down or something like that, right?
Sure.
So does that mean I borrow the $1,000 and then just get paid the $1,000 the following week? Or does that, like, do I have to pay any interest on that? Like, how does that process work as an employee, like for myself?
Absolutely. So it will actually only let you borrow up to 50% of your future check. So when people are utilizing our software, a lot of times they're using the timekeeping function or the scheduling function. So the software is smart enough to know how many hours you've already worked, how many hours you're going to future work, but it also takes into account that if something comes up and you don't work, you're not trying to borrow more money than you're actually earning. So one, it calculates those hours for you, so you're not guessing, but then it also only gives you access to part of it. So even if you've earned $1,000 already and you're going to earn $2,000, it will only let you borrow up to $1,000 because God forbid something happens. You want to make sure, that you're not borrowing against yourself. But yeah, there's no interest. You're just borrowing against yourself, which is also really helpful because you also see a lot of like payday loans happening right now, or a ton of commercials for that. And then you owe, 10, 15, 20%, which just gets employees further and further into the hole, which is not what we're hoping for.
Right. So are you finding that the and it seems obvious, but I'll get into the reason why I'm asking this question in a second, but like money is the biggest mover for employee retention? Because and maybe not so much in the cannabis space, but there's a lot of times where it's like people would maybe prefer more time off or flexible hours or insurance for their pets and stuff like that, right? I know you probably don't have like an actual number, right? But if you were to give a percentage of like how you would equate retention in terms of money, is it like 80% is about their wage, 70%, and the rest is like the intangibles, like team culture, upholding brand, are they liking their day to day? Where would you kind of put that on a sliding scale?
Yeah, I mean, it is different generationally. So if you still have some older employees, definitely compensation is the most important factor. And then benefits have always traditionally been the second most important factor. But now we're seeing those numbers dwindling. So money is always going to be a factor because people have bills and they simply have to be able to exist. Nobody wants to do a job and still not be able to pay their bills. That's really frustrating. So what we're finding though is that with the younger generations, compensation becomes more like 50% of that pie. Then I know, which is crazy. It used to be closer to like 80%.
That's crazy.
But now employee autonomy, career progression, having a company culture that they feel strongly connected to, having their company have a vision and a mission statement that they feel emotionally connected to, those are all ranking a lot higher than they used to. So it's also been a challenge for businesses if they've, run a couple of things in the past and they think I'll just pay people really well and maybe be a little bit inauthentic. That is just not working moving forward. You have to do both, which is requiring a lot from business owners and managers. They're having to pay a lot of money and also figure out how to be a leadership guru. And that's what we're here for, is to hopefully help them figure that out and not have to take like an entire year off to go through HR training themselves.
Right. 50%. That's insane. I just kind of threw that question out just because I was like, yeah, it's obviously money, right? But I guess not.
Yeah. I mean, again, if they can't pay their bills, then that's going to be a higher factor. But once they get to a spot where they can pay their bills, everything else is going to be a huge factor. And anything can be a sticking product, whether that is the pet insurance, whether that is a career projection. It's going to be different for each individual, but it's going to be a lot more emotionally connected now as opposed to financially.
For sure. So we have kind of the compensation that we want to give to our staff and then how we want to treat them. So now they're in the company. What does the now onboarding process look like? Because I know from my personal experience, whenever we onboard clients, that's arguably the most important piece of the puzzle, because that sets the first impression on how your clients are going to work with you, right? You don't just onboard them and then just kind of toss them to the side because they gave you money. Similarly, I would expect it to be the same when you find somebody that you like, you put them through the interview process and you decide this is a person that I want to give X benefits and X money to. What does the onboarding process look like? And, what are some of the key things that should be included in that?
Yeah, I'm glad that you understand how important that is, because I think that's something that is sometimes lost. People think like, yay, they're excited to get a job. They're totally going to, love working here. But it really is the first impression you make to an employee. So a smooth onboarding process, first of all, the reason why it's so important, it helps immediately reduce stress from your new employee. It helps with their job performance. It helps with their job satisfaction moving forward, which also in turn leads to retention. So you're more likely to have a productive employee who will stay longer if you tackle this correctly. So onboarding is going to be one of the biggest things. Again, you want to make sure you're setting it up correctly from the beginning. So again, this goes back to manual processes. Please take them out as much as possible. From an employee side, you want it to be as easy for your employee as you can possibly make it. If you can send them a link that will direct them to exactly what they need to fill out with instructions, with hand-holding, that is going to be easier for them than having to come in on their first day and fill out a bunch of paper documents. And then you're going to try to walk them through filling out a W-4 and an I-9. I have people who work in payroll who still can't figure out how to do a W-4 and an I-9 once this new form was created. So it's really complicated. So take yourself out of that. Let's not make it more difficult for you or the company. But then for your employee, it gives them that autonomy. They can fill out their tax information now without you. They can fill out their benefit information if you are offering benefits. They can also enter their own direct deposit. This one seems silly, but it is huge, because if you are onboarding and you have somebody fill out their direct deposit and then you have to manually enter that in the system and you key in something wrong, and an employee does not get their first direct deposit, typically they will only allow you to mess up 2 payrolls before an employee will quit. They will sometimes give you 1 chance, but by that second one, they are ready to hop ship. So that is not something you want to mess up. But if an employee fills out their own direct deposit and accidentally keys in a wrong number, now you are the hero coming to help them get their check, as opposed to the enemy who is keeping their money from them. So that is going to be huge. That's why I say do everything digitally. One, it makes it easier for the employee, but also from that compliance standpoint, you're not getting involved. There's no manual entry. There's no people error that's going to be involved in that. So that is the biggest thing I see, is just making onboarding too clunky. And like you said, it is the impression they get from you from the start. So if your onboarding is clear cut, if it is easy to follow and it's supported, that employee is going to feel like your company has it together and is stable from the very first day that they join you. Absolutely. Right. First impressions cannot be done again.
Right. But before we continue, if you're listening to this podcast, then you're probably interested in learning how to better market your own dispensary. I've got the perfect thing for you. Every Monday, I release a completely free newsletter where I send out advanced marketing and SEO strategies sent directly to your inbox. These strategies are a little bit too advanced, so I don't normally post it on social media because it can come across as a bit boring, but these strategies will significantly push your dispensary forward in ways that you couldn't even imagine. If this is something that you're interested in, please check out the links in the description below. You can sign up for the newsletter. It's completely free. It's designed to be read and consumed in 4 minutes or less, and you can unsubscribe at any time. So if you hate it, and if you hate me, you can go ahead and leave. I'll see you there. Go check out the links in the description below. So employees in, onboarding is, fingers crossed, as good as it possibly can be.
Sure.
And now they're kind of in the trenches of the business, right? I know when I had a couple interviews with some vendors, they would go and do kind of like employee training on the specific products and stuff like that. But obviously kind of the nurturing of your employees and helping them grow is also very important. There's a whole mantra of the whole hire slow, fire fast, right?
Sure.
And I think it's easy to say, but you can't just spend a month trying to find the right person and then, in a week just decide that, you want to fire them, right? It's just, logistically inefficient, let's say, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So what, in your opinion, is the balance between having good training for your employees and making sure that they don't drop the ball and their performance is good, to the other side where they might get a little bit complacent and they might not be doing the best job, and the whole mantra of quiet quitting now comes into place? So
Sure.
how do you go about kind of balancing these two, as an owner? It just seems like a very difficult equation.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And like I said, younger people today, they are with it. They are doing their own research. You cannot get anything by them.
Yeah.
And so this is, again, where authenticity plays a huge role. You have to do a couple of things, right? You have to pay your employees as well as you reasonably can afford to. Most people get it. If you can't pay them $40 an hour, they're not going to freak out. But if they know you're making a crap ton of money and you're paying them $10 an hour, it's going to be an issue. So just being transparent from the very beginning is super helpful. This is also where we talk about with that onboarding process, not only having the paperwork, but letting your expectations be known from the very beginning. So not only do you have somebody hand out paperwork, but you have them look at your actual mission and your values and your commitment as a company so that they can know right off the bat if that is something that aligns with them. Again, this is a much more emotional employee standpoint. If they don't feel that the company aligns with them, they're more likely to leave in that onboarding process than they are once you've already gotten them in the door. Because if they agree with you, they want to work towards your mission statement. They want to help you work towards your values. But that's also why it's important while you continuously have to as well. That's when I say, you can't just say something. You have to be about it in this industry. Yeah. If you're looking to help further education, what are you doing to do that? Are you hosting webinars? Are you having people come in and speak? Are you actually working on career progression with these employees? Or are you just saying you're going to? Because they will immediately spot that. If you say you care about your employees and you promote from within and you care about their career progressing, but then you're only hiring managers from outside, if nobody is ever progressing, if there are no pay raises, if there are no skills that are being increased, they're going to know immediately and they're going to hop ship. So it's about setting the expectations up from the beginning and then also delivering those expectations. And that's kind of it. It sounds crazy because that is how hard it is. And it shouldn't be hard, right? That should be the most basic thing on the planet. But we always start with a great idea. And then once we have to live up to that idea, you set a to-do list for your day, you set up a chore list and you're like, hey, I put 10 things, but I got 6. Yeah. That's passing, right? No, do all 10 of them. When it comes to your employees, do the things you say you're going to do. And that is how you reach the balance of setting up expectations and keeping your employees, but also, just not keeping people that are not a good company fit.
Yeah. Honestly, the foundation of a lot of this is, I always say, a really successful business just does the very, very simple things, but just at world-class consistency, right?
Absolutely.
It's not like we're reinventing the wheel. Like you said, if you have a checklist of 10 things and every day you go in and I check off 6 and I do 8 and then I do 2 and you're like 8, 8, 8 and then maybe a 9, you're like, okay, well, I did great the past week and then now I'm just going to do 2, 3s and 4s for the next month, right? It just makes it very difficult. And as you say, there's kind of the owners and then there's the employees and then there's a consistency of behavior and communication that needs to happen between the two. Because if there's, the ups and downs, what's going on, where's my pay? You said, we were going to get an increase, you said we were going to hire internally, then that creates a whole bunch of turbulence. Then, nothing's going to end up working out. But let's, you spoke on it briefly, career progression. Right. And I think it's, again, an easy thing to say, much like everything that we're talking about right now. Sure. Very difficult to do. Right. So what does a clear career progression look like? Not for you personally, but in terms of
my next 5 years.
Yeah. What does a career progression path look like for, the standard employee that is actually kind of looking for this? Are they looking to, does career progression just mean that they're going to get an increase in salary? Does this mean an increase in titles, an increase in responsibility, a mix of the three? Kind of what does that world typically look like to make your staff happy?
Sure, absolutely. I think this is one of the more important questions because we can talk all day about strategy and ideas, but this is where tactical HR and good old-fashioned documentation really comes into place in the HR world. So you can say you do a ton of things, but if you don't put that down in writing, it does not exist when it comes to HR documentation. So It's not the most exciting way to create progression, but it is a very clear way to do it, which is have documentation that you are promoting from within, put that in a handbook, make that something clear, and then also make that clear if anybody's talking about your company that you do. Another way to make that extremely well documented is to have pay scales. So one, from an HR compliance standpoint, let's say you have 4 bud tenders and they're all getting paid different wages. That's an issue because why? Why is one person getting paid more than the other person? That can be a discrimination issue. So the biggest thing I always tell people is if you have people with the same title making the same amount of money, there should be some type of differentiation. And this also helps with career progression. So if you have a bud tender, for example, and you want to have a beginner and an intermediate and a senior level bud tender, that does a ton of things. One, put that pay scale in your employee handbook. Make that clear from the beginning so that there are different levels of education and skill set that you want to see your employees hitting on. So no matter where they're coming, they know what those next steps are. It also tells them what they're aiming for. So it can be 3, 4 titles, whatever. They can be separated by 50 cents, $1, $10. It doesn't matter. It's completely up to whatever makes sense for your company, but it still gives documentation and value around your employees making those steps. So again, you cannot just preach about it here. You have to put it in writing, and it has to be something people can see. So it allows them to know what their expectations are. It allows them to progress. And then you have to help with training. You have to let them know, like, hey, if we're going to take you on as a beginner, there is a way to get to a senior bud tender. So-and-so is that person. Let's look at, what they know versus what you don't know, what you can learn from them, how we can get you to that progression. Or if you don't want to, that's fine too, but at least you know what that is. So for me, this is one of those things where, we can talk about feel good stuff all day, but put it on paper, put it in writing, make it so that somebody can hold you accountable to it. And then it'll feel much more stable for your employees, because it's so easy to make a million promises, especially in the cannabis space. It's so fun. You can be high all day. You can sell weed to your friends. No, that's not what we're doing. This is still a business. You still need to make progression. You still need to grow. So let me show you what I expect from you, but also how I'm going to support you to move forward.
State your expectations and follow through with with what you say. And keep it simple,
I know.
Right?
It's not rocket science. It just takes commitment. It takes time. Yeah. That's the hardest part.
And it's interesting because you also have to, I see from the other standpoint, you are now accountable to what you write down, right? So it's like, yes, it's nice. If you reach X position, you will go from 15 to 25, from 25 to 45 or whatever it is. Boom, time comes, employee's like, hey, here's the book. You said I was going to make $45 an hour if I did all these things, right? What's going to happen, right? And if you kind of made the wrong calculation, and you very well could have, right? You could have been like, well, if this person does all this stuff, I would equate they should make $45 an hour, but the business is not bringing in that amount of money, right? Now, I'm sure that also happens, right? Where you put something in writing, and you're like, oh, crap, like, maybe I shouldn't have done that, right? What does the conversation now look like between the leadership, the CEO, the owner, the CFO, whoever it is, right? And now the employee, where you might need to renegotiate what you initially set as expectations? And how does an owner now make sure that they don't ruffle any feathers, or try their best not to ruffle any feathers? Because ultimately, you said something, you're not following through with the promise, there is a greater than 0% chance that person will now leave. But do you have any tips or advice for to manage those kind of harder conversations once you've actually stated the thing that you promised that you were going to do?
First, I will say that I am not HR certified, so take everything I say with a grain of salt.
But this disclaimer, everyone the asterisk disclaimer.
This is just my personal opinion. Yes. No, I think transparency is going to be huge there. So if you set up expectations that were maybe loftier than you were able to reach, people don't expect you to be magical. They run the business. They're working the day-to-day business. They have a better idea of what's going on than you probably think they do. So more often than not, if you just sit down and have that conversation with the adult that works in your company, because depending on which state you're in, You have to be 18 or 21. We're not hiring 16-year-olds to be working in our cannabis industries. So they should be capable of just having that grown-up conversation and understand where you're coming from. Just level with them is what I would suggest. Just say, hey, our projections were to make X amount of dollars. We fell short of that by 10%. So you did earn this raise, but maybe that dollar is going to be about 10% less than we discussed. We can give you, 5%, but we can't give you an extra 15. We really value you. We want to be transparent with you. We see you as somebody who is important for our company. So we're going to be honest with you. That will go so far in making companies feel like they are invested in this company, that they know what's going on. That's also why you'll see a lot of companies kind of have all hands on deck meetings, maybe once a quarter, is to just let the employees know that like senior leadership knows what's happening. They want to hear you. They see what's going on in the industry. And then they give you feedback as well about how well the company is doing. Maybe you are going, huge and you're going to do 5 different states soon. Let your employees know that, because then you can get them excited to help you make that transition. Maybe somebody wants to move states and they're really excited now for that future. So I think, things are going to be rough. It's the cannabis space. It's never going to do what we want it to do. It's never going to do what we expect it to do, unfortunately. Yeah. So just be honest with them. I think that is first and foremost what you would want from somebody else. So just give that back to your employees.
Right. So I started a new dispensary, not big enough or have the resources to, hire someone, or hire Paragon, to kind of handle a lot of this stuff, right? What are some of the core things that you would recommend? Again, disclaimer, all that fun stuff. But what are some of the core things that you would, kind of give advice to help businesses, essentially with all the things that we spoke about, right? Stating intentions and doing expectations and, having the handbook. But a lot of times, your hands are tied, right? It's like, I just got the lottery, I got the license, I spent $500,000, right? And, I can't necessarily hire a team to be able to put these pieces in place. To like the MVP, the minimum viable product of HR, what would you typically recommend in terms of just main pillars that somebody could get started with?
Main pillars are going to be just really basic things. It's going to be, again, pay what you can reasonably. Do not overpromise anybody, right? Don't set yourself up for bad expectations. Again, figure out why you're starting this company. Almost everybody I've met in the cannabis space has a really interesting story. So be able to give that value proposition and that reasoning, not only to your customers, but to your employees, because then you're going to attract your tribe that has the same values in you and has the same goals as you. Those are going to be the easiest things to accomplish, because you should hopefully be really passionate and excited when you're starting cannabis. So you should be able to voice that to people and get them excited. The other things, I honestly would say talk to other people in the industry, right? Like you're not on an island alone. A ton of people have done this. Reach out to people in different states. If you're in a state that is just getting licenses, reach out to people who have been doing this for 5 years and see what did they go through? What were the pitfalls that they went through? This is one of the most welcoming industries I've seen it. Again, I've worked with healthcare, with construction, with manufacturing. They're not helping each other. They're not giving each other tips of the trade on how to be a good company. They're like, you are my competition and I want to fry you. That's not always the space in cannabis. Sometimes there are those companies, sure. But you can always find somebody who is willing to give you that advice, who is willing to give you their insight. And then I would say utilize, the internet, not Google. Don't just Google everything, but go to, different consultants. Check out your YouTube page. Go to people that are talking to other people in the cannabis space and just listen to those conversations. There's really no gatekeeping. People want to give you a ton of information. It's just a matter of if you have that amount of time to be able to do all of these things yourself. Again, I suggest outsourcing as much as you can, as soon as you can afford to. But if not, use your resources. There's a million blogs. We have a blog. Every HR company has a blog that'll give you an idea of what to do and what not to do. Start there from the very basics, and then as soon as you can, throw that lifeline out to get a couple of professionals in there, do that. But in the meantime, everybody is here and willing to help you and wanting to see the industry be really healthy and stick around. This is still something that people are fighting for. This isn't necessarily available. Again, I'm in South Carolina. There's really no real weed anywhere around me. We're still fighting the good fight to get it. So we want to make sure that the industry is propped up. So we will help you as much as we possibly can.
Why should people pay attention to HR sooner rather than later? Because I'm finding that, again, just my small sample size of experience, it's like this is, it's only until employee comes in and complains that they haven't gotten paid the proper wages, or, as you kind of alluded to before, there's some sort of discrimination, or they feel like there's some sort of discrimination, let's say, in this hypothetical situation. Anyways, kind of what would be your mini elevator pitch as to why people should pay attention to HR strategies similar to, as we spoke about, like much sooner than when, kind of shit hits the fan?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I will say the biggest thing I think of is, let's say you're on the Titanic. You should have counted those lifeboats before you got on the Titanic, not when you hit the glacier. Now you're sinking. So, for example, listen, I come from California. We all know it's one of the most litigious states in the country. So I have seen it all. I have seen companies get sued for, wrongful termination. That is something that the company totally thought was reasonable and it made so much sense, but just based off documentation alone, they lost, and that can put them out of business. So if you're really looking to get into something and be long-term, a lot of people open a company thinking this is what they're going to retire off of. But if you don't have HR in place, you're literally gambling the future of your business. It's never the most exciting thing. Nobody gets into any sort of business to be focused on payroll and HR, unless you are one of the sick freaks who works in the industry. But nobody's like, yeah, I can't wait to do paperwork for people. So that's never going to be the focus. But you want to make sure that you have everything aligned, because it will completely sink your company. Simple things like if you don't have a proper job description and somebody gets hurt doing something that they don't deem as part of their job, your workers' comp claim alone can put you out of business. So there's just no point in playing fast and loose with your company, even if it's bare bones HR, even if it's a one time, get a lawyer in before you start and get a handbook made, get a single consultation. I always recommend having something sooner rather than later, because once you're at the point where things are already wrong, it takes months to change the situations, change payroll companies, change HR companies, go through an evaluation. And if you don't have months to potentially be closed, if you don't have months to not have employees who want to work for you, if you can't survive that, then do not gamble with it. I mean, it's the scariest thing ever. That's why I always said I would never run a small business. I'll just sell to them, because they have to have balls of steel. I don't know how they do it. It's a scary industry to be in. So have your ducks in a row. Do not gamble.
Yeah, presumably you guys would be cheaper than the incoming lawyer that they would need to hire afterwards, and then whatever
a fraction of the cost. I promise you, I will run numbers. It's not even close. This is a cost savings. Right,
for sure. All right, well, let's rein this in. Where can we find your company? Where can we find you? Please plug all of your info.
Absolutely. So I work for the fantastic Paragon Payroll. Please check us out. It is very simple. Our website is paragonpayroll.com. We do have a fantastic blog. I will say start there. Our marketing team is constantly putting out information to get you guys up to date. Any hot tips that we're finding, we are sharing them. So please check that out. If you want to reach me specifically, T, first initial of Taylor, last name Mullen at paragonpayroll.com. If I brought up anything scary and you have questions, or you just want to chat with an HR and payroll nerd in the cannabis space, please feel free to shoot me an email. We are here, like I said, to support and prop up the cannabis industry as much as we possibly can.
Fantastic. Well, Taylor, it was an absolute pleasure. You can tell you're a beast in this space. I know when people, I can kind of geek out about like marketing and analytics and stuff like that. and people come to me, they're like, oh, that's kind of boring. I'm like, well, it's fun, right?
I swear it's really exciting.
Right? Similarly on your side, we definitely need a lot of people like you to kind of nerd out about these sorts of things, to kind of be, the great wall, to all the other expenses that you might need to pay for other things coming back in. But again, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on. And yeah, we'll definitely have to do this again.
Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, absolutely. Love having these nerdy conversations.
Awesome. Alrighty. Well, that's it for me. Thanks for hopping on the Dispensary Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Quan. And until next time, I will catch you guys later. See you.